Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Cathedral webinar live on February 26, 2026. If it's your first time attending one of our webinars, Cathedral means learning in Creek. And today you'll be learning about new market tax credits from Adam Rose, Director of Partnership and Growth with Travoy. My name is Jasmine Roming. I'm the marketing coordinator here at the Native Learning Center, and we are all so happy you could join us today. Please follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. The webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 60 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual properties. Before we get started, I want you to familiarize yourself with the learning platform and where things can be found. I have put the link to today's PDFs on the side in the chat for today. You can also access a copy of the slides as well as access today's webinar recording in the future by going to the courses section here on our platform. Any resource items for download are also available within the online course when you go into the courses pages. Each time you are ready to join one of our webinars moving forward, you will just log into the website and click the large green banner that will give you access to the webinar at the top of the screen, like showed in the picture displayed above. Okay, when you first join the webinar, it's important and it will prompt you to complete an audio test before joining. Please select the listen only option so we can avoid any audio feedback during the webinar, but at the end of the webinar, if you are interested, feel free to go ahead and ask questions if you'd like. If you're needing to change the speaker your sound is playing from, you can select the phone icon down at the bottom of your screen, and this will bring up a list of your speaker and mic devices so you can choose your preferred audio output. We do encourage you to participate during today's webinar, and we will primarily rely on the public chat and the left-hand gray menu panel. You can open the public chat and the shared notes. If you click on the public chat, you'll see a chat option between all the webinar attendees, and you can just go ahead and put any questions you might have into there. And then one final quick note. One final quick note while you're introducing yourselves in the chat is to try to avoid clicking on the red menu panel all the way to the left of your screen. If you click on this, the red menu panel, it'll take you out of today's webinar. If you do that accidentally, you can just go ahead and click this button on the side shown in the image to rejoin again, or click on the green banner at the top of the screen, similar to like how you joined today's webinar. Oh, sorry, I forgot to show you this is where you would actually click to come back to like the home screen or to go to the courses section, but try not to click it during the webinar or it'll take you outside of it, but you can always rejoin. And with that, it is a great pleasure to introduce today's webinar instructor, Adam Rose. I will go ahead and hand it off to you.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks to everyone joining today. If you joined last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago already, we talked about a resource called low-income housing tax credits at that time. Today, we're going to talk about something totally different. Similar in name only, but really that's where the similarity ends. This program is called New Markets Tax Credits. So let's just dive into it. Before I do that though, if you're able, if you want to go ahead and put your name in the chat or where you're from or the state at least, that would be helpful. This is certainly a program that is available across the country. It's not just for tribes. So I'm going to try to get into some specifics about how you would go about thinking about try to access this resource. Again, it's totally different from the housing tax credit program as well. So to introduce myself, my name is Adam from Travoy. I've been with Travoy now going on 18 years. Our work started working with tribes back in 1995. continues to this day with two primary funding resources where we help. One of those is called low-income housing tax credits. The other one that we're going to talk about today is called new markets tax credits. Today, we're going to talk about new markets tax credits. It's for things like admin facilities, healthcare projects, education type projects, language schools, business investments, many, many more, broadband. It could be for wastewater treatment facilities, that type of thing. But before we jump into that and kind of get into more depth about how that particular funding resource works, I just want to spend 2 minutes talking about the other program that we help with called low-income housing tax credits. That program is by far the biggest program for affordable housing in the country. Low-income housing tax credits came about in 1986. It's, again, the biggest resource for affordable housing in the country. What tribes have available to them that's unique is that you have your limited NAHASDA dollars, maybe some tribal funds, but you can layer those and stack those with low-income housing tax credits as well. So the huge difference to keep in mind is that that particular funding resource, LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits, that's for rental housing, but it could be for elder housing, it could be for single-family detached units, it could be for apartments, that type of thing. That program could oftentimes cover between 60 and maybe 80, or even in some cases a little bit more % of a project's cost, the portion that does not have to be paid back. So if you're trying to do a very large housing development, trying to leverage some other resources, housing tax credits is a great way to do that. And again, that program is specifically called low-income housing tax credits. I see several people on from Yurok today, from the Tallawahd Nation in California, from White Earth. All of those are ones that I know of, Yakima, that have used housing tax credits very, very successfully. Switching to today's topic, new markets tax credits, this program kind of came as an offshoot, but it came about in 2000. But at the time, Congress decided to structure the program entirely differently. So the end of the day kind of structure, the end goal is still the same, to incentivize private investment into lower income communities that need additional capital. But the mechanism works completely differently. And it's, again, like other than in name, there's very, very little similarity with the structure of housing tax credits. One thing that I do want to mention, though, that is really, really important is that this is a funding resource, and it can be a big one that does not have to be paid back. So it's never going to cover the entirety of a project's cost. More likely, it's going to cover around 20% of a project's cost. But again, extremely, extremely valuable on projects of a larger scale, say of $5 or $10 million, because it provides a capital source that does not have to be repaid. Okay, so again, like if there's one takeaway from our discussion today, it would really be this, that again, in no case, new markets tax credits is ever going to be the primary source. It's never going to be the majority funding source, but it can work really, really well in scenarios where you have other capital. The tribe has brought other capital to the table. That could be bank funds, it could be debt, it could be tribal proceeds, philanthropic proceeds. It could be any different combination of lots of different funding. But the basic idea with new markets tax credits is that by leveraging and using the pool of resources that you're bringing to the table, it enables this private investment of capital, private capital to come in and help offset that last portion of the project's cost. So maybe there's been cost overruns or there's things that you want to add back into the project. This is really where new markets tax credits can be an extremely, extremely valuable tool. I do want to mention something real quick and point this out that I forgot to mention, is that a really important thing did happen as part of the bill that passed in July. This is not specifically related to tribes at all, but Congress did make the program permanent back in July. So previous to that, it had only been on a couple year reauthorization cycle. With this being permanent now, tribes can rely on it, that it is going to be a tool that will be there for the foreseeable future. It'll continue to be a resource that tribes, it's worthwhile to learn about because the program is now permanent. So for all of those reasons, it's just another tool and another resource for tribes to keep on your radar. So what can you do with new markets tax credits? I would say it's extremely, extremely flexible. So this list is certainly not an all-inclusive list, but you can absolutely do healthcare, education projects. Maybe you're building a new admin building. We've done quite a few hotels, microgrid projects. Maybe you're trying to support housing and your admin facility and your casino operations with a standalone microgrid. That's absolutely the type of business investment type of project that could benefit. It could be for things like grocery stores, or maybe you're working on a Head Start project. And when I say business investments, think about it this way. Maybe the tribe is trying to purchase another business, diversify income streams into the tribe. You can use new markets tax credits for that type of purchase. Or you can also use new markets tax credits as part of an existing business. So maybe you need additional machinery or facility upgrades for an existing business. This is another great tool where this can fit in as part of the capital stack. There is one really interesting use of new markets tax credits related to housing, and that's specifically for home ownership financing. So where the low-income housing tax credit is typically going to be the resource for rental housing at a bigger scale, say 25 or 30 homes, if you have an existing home ownership program, you already have that program maybe capitalized, and you're repeatedly building homes on a regular basis and selling them to tenants. Think about new markets tax credits as a resource in this capacity. It would basically be the mechanism to help you continue that business of building homes. And what I mean by that is that instead of funding a business to build widgets, it effectively provides capital where your business is the business of building homes on a regular basis. And so in that kind of unique scenario, on the 7-year compliance period, this is really kind of unique to the home ownership financing scenario. You would have to understand that you would have to build one home every year for the 7-year compliance period. But let's say you have an already capitalized home ownership program. You need additional capital or want to scale that up to benefit more families. This is a great way to do so because it does not have the same type of income restrictions as, say, the low-income housing tax credit program. Typically, the low-income housing tax credit program, you have to serve families 60% or below, 60% area median income or below. On the new markets tax credit side for home ownership, it's more flexible than that. The income targeting is easier to comply with because, again, it's think of it more as a capital to fund this business of homes that you're building. Lots of other things on here that you can do as well with new markets tax credits that aren't included. You can do expansion of an existing facility. So we're working now on several healthcare projects. Let's say that you're adding a behavioral health wing and you're adding a $35 million expansion of your existing facility. That could absolutely be a new markets tax credit to leverage this funding resource. It could be the renovation of an existing facility. So just talked to a client this week. They're moving into a brand new admin facility kind of across the driveway. Their old facility currently houses a very robust daycare facility, daycare program, but they're basically going to convert the rest of the old admin space into daycare as well. So you could absolutely use new markets tax credits for something like that. It can be for projects that aren't even necessarily in the same geography. So you could have maybe 2 community facilities that you're working on in different parts of the community. Maybe they're miles apart or counties apart even, you could roll those into the same transaction. Another flexible way to think about it is that maybe there's infrastructure that is ultimately going to serve and benefit future development at the site, and you're putting in a water treatment facility in addition to a community facility that's going to have the opportunity for cultural events and language functions. Those could be rolled together into like the same new markets tax credit transaction as well. So ultimately, just the takeaway is that it's very, very flexible ultimately in how it's used. There's a couple ways that I like to encourage our clients to think about how to use new markets tax credits. And again, it's such a flexible resource that any of these or all of these can be applicable. So sometimes a project goes out to bid, there's other resources available, but there's a 20% increase in cost. So most of the capital is there, but you need some additional capital. New markets tax credits can be the piece that can cover those cost overruns effectively to enable you to get the project completed. Another way that I like to think about it is that sometimes there are instances where there are funds available, everyone's happy with the project, but in the process, things had to get cut out that ideally the community wants and that the tribe wants. An example is maybe it's an education project, and instead of 2 really nice playgrounds for different age kids, there just wasn't the funds to do that. So one of the 2 playgrounds maybe gets eliminated from the scope of work. Think about new markets tax credits as a resource to be able to add those things back into the project. The last way is this. Perhaps, again, like I'm going to go back to the example that maybe you're doing a large healthcare expansion and you have a project that is under construction. Again, you're going to add a behavioral health wing to your existing clinic, but that expansion itself is, say, in the $15 to $20 million range. Let's say that the tribe has contributed funds to the project. It's using some other debt and, maybe 2 grants from 2 various sources to make the project possible. In that scenario, even if the project is under construction, what you can do is you can benefit from new markets tax credits by using the new markets tax credit proceeds, the 20%, and basically replacing the money that the tribe has already put in with the new markets tax credit proceeds. So what that effectively enables the tribe to do is take the 20%, maybe it's $2 million on a $10 million project, and reinvest that into something completely different altogether. It could be a different program. It could be, maybe some type of reserve for that particular program, but it could be something completely unrelated. It would be freeing up capital of the tribe's money to enable the tribe to do whatever else makes sense for the community to benefit from. So just a couple quick examples. This is a healthcare project. It's technically under the health arm at Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. It's part of their healthcare facility or their healthcare entity, because the idea here is, they built this great facility. It's got a pool, it's got a water slide, it's got a recreation center. But really the idea there is getting kids in the door that receive services, and the tribe provides additional services, educational programming, behavioral health services to the kids that are coming to the wellness facility. So for that reason, the facility is part of their health entity at the Coeur d'Alene tribe in Idaho. Another example, this is a great example of a project, language charter school project at Red Lake. You can use it for early childhood education. You can use it for daycare. You can use it for, a typical K through 12 school. You can use it for college-related projects. There's really no restriction whatsoever on how you use it for an education project. It can be used alongside, maybe there's a BIE school that you're contributing to. You could use new markets tax credits as part of that. It could also be maybe there's a public school nearby, and that public school serves lots of kids in your community. New markets tax credits can be used in that regard as well. And in all of those scenarios, typically we would tell our clients that this is a resource for projects in the range at the low end of, say, $4 million. At the high end, there's no real cap, but it can, ideally, it's probably a project in the, say, 10 to 12 to 15 to $20 million range. It could certainly be a project bigger than that. There's really no cap. That doesn't necessarily mean that you would get like the full benefit of new markets tax credit proceeds on a very, very large project, but you could certainly, you could still use it even to the extent that you're not benefiting from the entire cost of the project. Again, I would recommend that typically a small size project on the new markets tax credit side might be $4 million. An ideal project is probably in the 15 to 20 to $30 million range. Another example here, this is at Colville in Washington. So kind of a series of disjointed trailers that they were using before. Wasn't really a super efficient delivery of services to their membership. So a few years ago, they used new markets tax credits as part of the capital stack to build kind of a world-class, first-class administration facility. There's a cafeteria, there's a little restaurant and a coffee shop in there. Replaced all the trailers and kind of the different geographic locations where those were scattered about, brought all those services in-house under one roof. Just another great example of tribes doing the work every day to serve their communities. So let's kind of start to think about how this mechanism works. And I would say that in my experience with new markets tax credits, the downside of this program is that there is some like weird industry jargon, and there's like, it's too heavy with all these like acronyms. I'm not going to get tied up in all the acronyms today and all the weird structure. I really want to keep it as simple as possible so that this is a tool that everyone can start to wrap their head around. There's always lots of time to get into the weeds about these weird acronyms and the structure and, bringing the attorneys in and that type of thing. But today, I just want you to get at a high level how this works, with the idea that it's certainly an education process, but just because something is new or unfamiliar isn't necessarily a great reason to avoid it altogether. There's no doubt in my mind that tribes continue to use mechanisms and funding resources every single day to benefit their communities. This one is no different. It is a little strange. It's kind of a little wonky, but I do think it can be really, really beneficial in that it provides that capital around 20% that doesn't have to be paid back. So to start and to kind of understand this from a high level, this is not a program that you as the developer of the project are applying directly to the Treasury Department. So instead, when Congress set up this program, they gave the authority to basically hand out and distribute these credits to private entities. And those entities are entities called CDEs, community development entities. There's about 200 of those across the country. And so it's the responsibility of the CDE to apply to the Treasury Department. So Travoy is a CDE. We help the Chickasaw Nation form their CDE. We help with some of the back-end work of supporting their CDE. So the idea here is that every CDE that's out there, they commit to serving different projects of different scale and scope and a different niche. So think about it this way. There are CDEs that do everything from serving rural healthcare projects to urban manufacturing projects in Kansas City to projects limited to geography such as New York or New Jersey. And then like at the other end, there's groups like Travoy. We're national. We commit 100% of our allocation to tribal projects. The Chickasaw Nation also commits 100% of their allocation to benefit tribes. Native American Bank is a third group that also has allocation in this most recent round. They commit all of their allocation to tribal projects. And a fourth group that received allocation for the first time ever is a WISTA. So those four groups are the four groups that commit their entirety of their allocation to tribal projects. So again, if you are in Arizona, as an example, there is a group called Clearinghouse CDFI. Clearinghouse, they can and they do deploy their new markets tax credits into tribal projects, but they may not do that entirely. They may not exclusively do tribal projects. So what you as a developer are trying to do is you're trying to identify and find a CDE that their project type and the geography that they serve matches up with the type of project that you're putting together. And so for our CDE, Travoy, as with Chickasaw, most of our focus is on education projects, healthcare projects, admin facilities, community infrastructure, hospitality projects. So it's very, very wide and broad as far as the types of projects that we could help fund through our CDE. Sometimes groups, their mission and the project types that they serve is more narrow. But again, both us and the Chickasaw Nation, quite broad, but ultimately we're only going to work with tribes. We're only going to put this in a tribally related entity developed by the tribe and owned by the tribe directly. So again, just understand that this is a resource you do not have to apply to the Treasury Department. Instead, you want to work and find a CDE, and that group is ultimately going to deploy this resource directly into your project. And that, again, that could be a grocery store, it could be an admin facility, it could be a wastewater treatment facility, whatever it may be. Before I continue, I'm going to just take a pause for a minute, because this is sort of where, admittedly, it starts to get a little confusing and the acronyms start to kind of be a little much at some point. So if there's questions, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to kind of build on this part of the conversation and just make sure that everyone has it and understands it as a resource. There's a question about, can you fund a manufacturing project? The answer would be absolutely yes. The only thing that you can't really do is you can't use it to buy and purchase agricultural land. There's a few other things you can't do. You can't do gaming directly. You can't do massage parlors. You can't do liquor stores. But let's say that you're financing and you're purchasing equipment for the processing of some type of agricultural product. That the mechanical systems and the machinery itself, that can all be used with new markets tax credits. You just can't use it for the land itself. There's a question about, can new markets tax credits be used in a community that is not geographically located within a designated low income census tract? Yeah, that's a great question. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but the thing to understand about new markets tax credits right off the bat is that it does come with a geographic eligibility requirement. And so there's a very easy way to figure that out. Just shoot me an email or shoot me a text and I can look up your address. There's also a publicly available map that you can determine whether or not your census tract is automatically eligible to use new markets tax credits. I think the next thing to understand, and to that question, is that there's actually another way to use new markets tax credits, even if you're not in a qualified census tract. And the way to do that is something that I'm not going to dig into extensively today, but it's called the targeted population exception. And basically what that rule is that if you are in a geography that does not qualify based on geography alone, you can still use new markets tax credits with a slightly added layer of compliance if you're willing to commit and show that you're serving low-income populations with the project, or that you're going to maintain a certain portion, a very low portion of low-income employees at the time of hire. So there is absolutely a path where you can use it in a non-qualified tract. Again, you're going to dig into something called using the targeted population exception. there's a note that not all reservations are qualified. That is absolutely correct. I've seen scenarios where, let's say one side of the road, the reservation is split into two counties. The north side could qualify and the south side maybe does not qualify. So there are certainly instances where one side of the road can make a difference as far as eligibility for the program. There's also a question about what percentage of new infrastructure can New Markets Tax Credit be used for. What I would say related to infrastructure is, maybe you're doing like a water tower or a water treatment facility. Ideally, it's something more than just like the roads and the sewer. Think about infrastructure as like something that would sort of be like a business, that would operate like a business, that there's some type of customer and, maybe the tribe is covering all that cost, but there's some type of end user of the facility. In that case, it absolutely works fine. It works. There's no problem with that whatsoever. But it's sort of, again, this idea that you're funding a business. And again, that business could be a water treatment facility or something similar to that. It's not as ideal for just straight like sewer and water for a residential neighborhood. Think about infrastructure more broadly, like, it could be, broadband infrastructure, or that, it's you're building out or expanding a lagoon system that's going to serve a broader section of the community and enable future economic growth. That's really the best way to think about how it can fund infrastructure. Any other questions, like right off the top, about how this works, or like the general idea behind it? Okay, so let's kind of dig into what this structure starts to look like and how this program works, both to benefit the tribe and ultimately to benefit the investor that's buying these credits. So the whole idea here is that Congress created a mechanism to incentivize private investment into projects that need additional capital. So there's no question about it that a project like this will have a partner, and that partner will be an entity like US Bank. Now, what you have to understand is that they're not putting in a loan to the project. Instead, the program is set up that the investor partner, they're going to claim a tax credit and use that tax credit to offset their federal tax liability over a 7-year period. So they're going to get 7 years of tax credits. In exchange, they're going to put money into your project that doesn't have to be paid back. So the fundamental gist of this whole thing is that they are making a financial return, but that financial return comes in the form of federal tax credits. And that amount ends up being more than what they end up putting into the project up front. And that's fundamentally why the mechanism does not have to be repaid. So it works like this. Let's say that it's a $10 million clinic operation, and that clinic is going to be, it's going to provide a variety of services. It's going to have a optometry office, a physical therapy office, a dental office, and a general practitioner office. It doesn't really matter what's up in the inside of the facility. What you're ideally trying to do is that you're trying to get New Markets Tax Credit allocation that is essentially 1-to-1 to the total development cost of the project. And again, what you need to understand from the onset is that if you get $10 million of New Markets Tax Credits, that is not $10 million going into the project. It's not $10 million that's going to the investor. It's just the first starting point of how this is structured, in that Congress set it up that programs and projects try to get 1-to-1 to the total development cost of the project. So again, a $10 million project, you're going to talk to your CDE about a $10 million allocation of New Markets Tax Credits. In that scenario, the very first thing that's going to be required is that the tribe or the developer, whoever that is, the educational entity, the health entity of the tribe, you're going to be bringing resources to the table. So again, assume that you're trying to bring and you're trying to leverage 80% of the project's cost. So again, this amount of funds that the tribe is bringing to the table, this could be a combination of different resources. It could be grants already received. It could be grants that you're currently seeking that you're anticipating. It could be a USDA secured loan. And then maybe in this example, maybe it's a additional contribution of $2 million from the tribe. When you have that leverage on a new markets tax credit project, again, the funds firmly committed and into the project, that's what enables this capital from an outside third-party entity to put money into the project that ultimately doesn't have to be paid back. So in this case, let's assume that entity is US Bank. What they're going to do is they're going to claim, they're going to benefit from a 39% tax credit that is a total of the total new markets tax credit allocation. So just for round numbers, let's say that they get a $4 million amount of tax credits, but that comes in increments only totaling $4 million after a 7-year period. So they don't get $4 million every year. In total, after they claim a series of increments, they would get $4 million of federal tax credits that they use to offset their tax liability. In exchange, they're going to put money into your project up front as construction period funds. And because they're making, in this case, just for round numbers again, $4 million of federal tax credits, they're able to put money in less than that up front that does not have to be repaid. So it's structured with an assumption that while it goes in technically as a loan into the project, it's assumed that that loan, and it's understood, and every other project that has benefited from this has benefited this way, is that the loan is forgiven, and then there's no principal or interest that has to be repaid because the new markets tax credit investor has received a benefit of tax credits that exceeds what they put into the project. Let me stop there again, and let me just put an opportunity out for questions about that. Does that make sense? That, again, they're not doing this out of the good of their heart necessarily. They are making a financial return, but they're incentivized to partner with tribes and to developers of projects like these because they're claiming the federal tax credit, which the tribe does not need. So who makes sure that the loan is forgiven? So, yeah, that's a great question. So what happens is this: after the project, after the partner, again, it could be like a US bank type entity, after the 7-year period, they don't ever have any interest in the real estate itself. Their interest is only in the tax credits that flow to the project over a 7-year period. So what happens is this: at year 7, the tax credit partner exits, and there's no other entity in the project other than the tribe and an entity that you choose to replace that investor limited partner. So it could be like another special purpose entity. Maybe it's an entity formed under tribal law. That's totally fine. Maybe it's like a sub entity under like a section 17. But again, their interest is not the project. It's not the real estate. It's not repayment of these funds. It's the 7 years of tax credits that they're claiming over the 7-year period. There's a question about, so they need to repay if the tax credits are less than they contribute. No, so they're always going to contribute into the project something a little bit less because, again, that's how they make their financial return. But the thing to understand is this: they don't get that return over until a full 7-year period. So they put their money in at a discounted rate. And then in this scenario, they would make the difference between $4 million that they earn in tax credits and the $2 million that they put into the project. But tribes, nonprofit developers, projects that are trying to use this mechanism, you're not concerned about offsetting your federal tax liability. You're concerned with another funding source. You're trying to use another funding source as part of the capital stack that doesn't have to be paid back. Another question: if the project fails, does the tribe have to pay the investor back? So across our portfolio of tribal projects that have used New Markets tax credits, none of them have ever failed, and none of them have ever had to repay the New Markets tax credits. And the reason that I say that is that to fail is extremely, extremely difficult. Number one, it's only a 7-year period, so relatively short in forms of grants and other funding sources. But failure does not necessarily mean that the use of the facility changes over that time. So let's just go back to our example of like a healthcare example. Maybe you set up the space and you say, we're going to have a physical therapy office. Well, maybe 2 years later that you change the use of that, and instead you bring in a specialized eye doctor or whatever it is. Changing the use does not account as a failure. The only way that you could actually be in non-compliance with the program is that if you physically picked up the building and moved it to a non-qualified tract, or if you converted it into one of those uses that is prohibited. And that list is extremely limited. You couldn't change the school into a casino. So we've never seen any instance of non-compliance, tribal or not, in the New Markets tax credit program. Again, the investor, their interest, it's not a punitive program. They earn their tax credits regardless of the use of, how the tribe is using the space. That doesn't matter. The space can change uses over the course of that time. There can be vacancies in the space. That's not a big deal. You still have to demonstrate that the project itself is a standalone entity with its own audit. But, I would say it's very, very highly unlikely that you would be non-compliant in a way where you would have to repay the tax credits. There's a question about what if the government changes to the tax rules, like under a new administration or the current administration? Yeah, that's a great question as well. So what happens is that when you receive this award of tax credits, that becomes permanent to the project for that 7-year period. So again, the understanding is like the transaction is benefiting the investor with 7 years of tax credits. So regardless of what happens with Congress or a new administration, there's always going to be a federal tax liability of some kind. And so even if there's tweaks in that program, an investor partner like US Bank, they're still going to have very, very significant tax liability one way or another. And so even if their tax liability is slightly reduced, they're still very much interested in claiming the tax credits over the 7-year period. Again, like an entity like US Bank, who's claiming $4 million of tax credits in total over 7 years, like that's like a tiny, tiny fraction of their total tax liability. So even if the tax rules were to change, it would not take away or would not change whether or not the investor partner could use the credits. Hopefully that answers that question. But if you want me to clarify, or if it does not, please let me know. There's another question about, for a $12 million solar project, could a tribe get a loan from a CDE, use the investment tax credits, ITC, and New Markets tax credits to offset 70% of the project cost, and get a developer to invest 30% of the project, and they still get the federal tax credit in exchange? Yes. You are very, very close to understanding how this could work. With the one caveat, well, not even that. So in our case at Travoy, we are just a CDE that would provide the New Markets tax credit proceeds into the project. We are not a bank in addition. There are some groups that do both. So Capital One is an example. They're both a CDE and a lender. So they could provide the loan and they could provide the tax credits on the project. But let's just step back. Let's just assume that this was a $12 million, and I'm gonna tweak it just a tiny bit. I'm gonna call your $12 million solar project like a microgrid system with battery backup, storage, and that with an assumption that that solar project / batteries is serving a whole bunch of low-income households, the tribal admin facility, the health facility, and the nearby wellness facility. All of those kind of could be served by that project. So it's absolutely correct that the investment tax credits would still apply. They would not be negated by the use of new markets tax credits. You would have some capital offsetting the project cost, but that capital, whether it was equity, whether it was debt, whether it was other funding from other philanthropic sources, that wouldn't matter. It would just have to be a scenario where those funds could be pooled and put into the new markets tax credit structure. New markets tax credits would come in as construction period funds. It comes all in as one shot into the project. It's not reimbursable. And then I'm going to tweak your scenario just a little bit, just to clarify as well. So right now, tribes have the opportunity to claim direct pay, the elective pay. I know that that's going to go away and expire soon, but you could use new markets tax credits in a way that does not conflict with being able to claim the direct pay, elective pay opportunity after it's placed in service. A $12 million project would be like absolutely like right in the sweet spot range, where a $12 million project could likely benefit from, say, $2.5 or $3 million of capital, and that would ultimately be the portion that doesn't have to be paid back. If I did not answer that question, feel free to clarify or let me know if there's anything that I can do to expand on that. One more question is that how long is the compliance period? Yeah, the compliance period on new markets tax credits is 7 years total. And we see that actually as a pretty big benefit to the program. Like the housing tax credit program, for example, it's a 15-year minimum compliance period. Oftentimes it's 15 years above and beyond that. So in the terms of real estate, whether or not it's a hotel, a school, a clinic, something like that, like even if it changes uses within 7 years, that's okay. That's permitted. But 7 years is a really relatively quick period of time when we're talking about financing, especially with other financing that might be, have a 20-year loan or a 30-year loan on the project. We talked about doing hospitality projects. We at Travoy, we have zero qualms whatsoever. We see these as great economic development drivers for communities. They provide good, solid jobs. They provide jobs and opportunities across a range of different income levels. And so not every CDE right now is going to do a hospitality project, but we continue to see these as very, very important projects to drive tribal projects, tribal communities forward. So you can't do it on the same exact, it can't have gaming in the same building, but it could be on the same property. It could be maybe there's a separate roof line so that legally it's a different structure than the casino, but we have no problem supporting hospitality projects that are part of a larger economic development strategy that includes gaming. C-stores, grocery stores, these are ones that I didn't mention before, but again, like these are really important cash flow drivers to tribes to be able to diversify their economies, for tribes to use and to strengthen their own sovereignty. And so if that is what is important and that's what the tribe decides is the priority investment for the tribe, again, we're going to defer to you on what that best interest is and what that looks like for your community. This goes to our question from before that, there's a very, very few things that you can't do. Even if your project is not in a qualified tract, again, there would be this opportunity where you can use it. You have to meet what's called the targeted population exception. But in that scenario, basically what you're doing is you're recognizing that your employees would either be low income, a portion, or the population that you're serving would be low income. So if you're in a geographically eligible tract, those two things don't apply. There's no additional compliance requirements. You would be eligible based on just the geography of the project itself. A very, very few limited list of things you can't do. I don't know if anyone is doing a hot tub parlor. I guess that's not approved one on the list, but basically anything else is eligible. Okay, I'm going to go back to, this is great because the person asked about a $12 million scenario. So this just happens to be a $12 million scenario. Again, this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit of these different acronyms. I'm going to stay away from all the weird acronyms and the industry jargon. I'm going to just try to make this as simple as possible. And then if you do want to like continue to get into the weeds, typically that process looks like, hey, let's bring our CFO in. Let's have a conversation with the attorney. Maybe 4 or 5 conversations later, you say, hey, this is worthwhile. Let's talk to the council about this. This is all part of the education process. So to me, it's like doing high-level calculus. You can't do calculus if you don't understand the basic foundation of it. So let's just start there today. On a $12 million project, again, I'm going to just avoid the acronyms altogether. A $12 million new markets tax credit project. The tribe is going to bring leverage in an amount of about $9 million to the project. When that happens, or assuming that it happens, again, it could be for a project already under construction. In that case, the $9 million is already secured and in hand, or you could be working on raising that capital right now. But on a $12 million project, when you get to around that $9 million number, that triggers this ability for new markets tax credits to start to flow into this new markets tax credit structure. So the investor, they put in funds, out of which some of those funds are paid to the CDE. The CDE's fee is paid by the investor, not by the tribe. And what ends up happening is we end up with 2 soft loans that go into the project. One loan from the tribe that is your pool of money and pool of resources, and a second soft loan that goes in from the new markets tax credit investor through the CDE. And ultimately, all of this flows into the project at the bottom of the structure. Again, this acronym is Qualified Active Low Income Community Business. Think about that as like the school or the grocery store or the healthcare expansion. It's the project at the end of the day that does have to remain and retain a separate set of books. It will be a component unit of the tribe, or kind of rolled up into the larger financials, but it will have its own special purpose entity that owns that building. Again, that could be formed under tribal law. It's not a state limited partnership, but this is a standalone entity through which the new markets tax credit proceeds have to flow. At closing, you'll have a new markets tax credit attorney. You'll likely have local counsel. Their fees, including the accounting cost, some financial projections, those all come out at closing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out $250,000 to pay the legal and accounting costs. So in this scenario, initially $2.9 million of benefit goes into the structure, but we're going to subtract out $250,000 of legal expense that's paid at closing. So $2.6 million of new money is going to go into the project. Now, the next thing that I want to be completely real about and completely forthcoming about is that there is some ongoing accounting and compliance fees that have to be paid over the 7-year period. But you don't have to pay those necessarily from the project proceeds. What you could do instead is you could set those aside from the money coming into the project and just say, hey, we're going to pay those from a reserve that we set up with our new money. So if you were to do that, if you were to set aside those 7 years of fees into a reserve, there would be $2.2 million of new money outside of all the transaction costs, outside 7 years of compliance and the associated transaction costs over the 7 years, that would be available to benefit the project in any way that the tribe feels appropriate. So again, that's how we would get to that net roughly 20% benefit to the project. This would be money that goes in at closing. It's not reimbursable. It would be part of the rest of the capital stack. And I think the other thing that's important to note is that This in no way is a structure that we would intend, or we wouldn't want it to divert from or delay any of your other financing. So let's say that in this $12 million project, let's again, like, call it the microgrid example that we're talking about. Maybe you're set on starting construction in the next month or so. New Markets tax credit proceeds can still come in even after 2 years of construction start from the time of closing. So maybe you decide to proceed and you say, hey, we're going to get this rolling. We're just going to have these funds take out some of the tribal contribution. That's perfectly allowable. So what happens in that scenario is the $2.2 million net benefit. Let's say some of this contribution, some of this leverage was coming from the tribe directly. In that case, the New Markets tax credit proceeds could simply replace and repay some of the tribal contribution into the project. There's a question about, what if you don't set aside, then the $250,000 would be due at closing. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, like, what I'm saying here is, like, typically the legal expense, the accounting bills, those are all just tallied up at closing, and then they're paid directly from the proceeds on the day of closing. So after that allowance of $250,000 is paid here, that's how we would get to $2.6 million of new money into the project. And then just to take that one step further, like, again, you could pay the ongoing fees and compliance out of a different source, or money from the project, or whatever it is, different revenue source altogether. That's perfectly allowable. The other way to think about it would be, you could just set aside those funds from this money. And if you were to do that, if you were just to put those into a separate account and pull money from that account to pay the ongoing accounting expense or the audit or that type of thing, you would have effectively $2.2 million after all those fees are paid. And then the next question is, and would that cover the 7 years? So yes, that's exactly right. The idea here is that if you wanted to the extent that it's helpful for the project, you could set aside the full 7 years of the compliance fees and the audit fees, so you didn't have to come up with a new source of money. So it's all taken care of. You say to the council, we're not going to have to pay this bill every year for 7 years. We're just going to take it from this account that we already have set up. It's specifically for that purpose. And again, like, if you're taking that out, if you're deducting it, essentially, if you're just setting it aside, it would be $2.2 million of cash to benefit the project. Again, I'll stop there for just a minute, because this is certainly one of the points where it can get a little confusing. I would highly recommend, and my approach would be that if you kind of get it today and it sort of makes sense, just reach out. We're more than happy. This is a conversation we have, maybe it's 5-10 times. Maybe it's over the course of a full year. You might be working on a project, as far out as next year. You say, hey, we're going to build a new health facility. We should be thinking about this resource now. That's absolutely the best approach to take, is that you could be thinking about how to build up capacity around this, how to get the tribe on board, how to get legal counsel integrated, how to get your finance team. All of that happens over many, many conversations, over often months. And so if there's an interest, if you say, hey, like, I think that this really could benefit our project, we could really benefit from this funding resource, just reach out to me. The next step is that we would just kind of do a Zoom like this, and gradually that circle grows. We can start expanding on kind of these different elements of the project. And by the third time that you see and understand what a qualified low-income community investment, a QUILICI, is, it starts to click. But again, like, don't get caught up in the acronyms today, because I think that just makes it very confusing to start. So to the fundamental question that you're probably all asking, well, like, how do I actually get this into my project? I would say it's these three things. First is that you're going to continue moving the project along. So let's go back to our $12 million microgrid project. Maybe you're in the planning phase. Maybe you've already hired an engineer that's working on construction documents. But a big part of that is that you're also working to raise the other capital on a New Markets deal. So just remember that new markets tax credits is never going to be like the first source of resource. So if you have a project that's a year out, think about how do we position ourselves? How do we position the tribe to take advantage of this? And that starts with education. So the more that you can do to get everyone on board with how it works, how the transaction is going to be set up, talking with your CDE, maybe you check in with us every couple weeks. We're helping you try to problem solve and troubleshoot around do we need to have a conversation with your lender? Do we need to make sure that they know this structure so that there isn't something that's a surprise to them when it comes time for you to use this? As you move the project along, again, like it could be a scenario where maybe you've already hired a contractor. Maybe you already have a GMP and this thing is going to get started and they're on the ground and they're starting work next week. That's fine. That's no problem. The other big part that you're trying to do is raise that leverage, the other funds that you're bringing to the project. And again, you don't have to raise 100% of the capital, but it's going to be a little bit more than like 40% of the capital. You're going to try to get to that 70, 80% mark. And in that process, you're working with your CDE. Again, you're communicating. We're kind of understanding what the need is. You're communicating to them like, hey, we just got a commitment from our bank. We secured another loan for $3 million. We're right in that sweet spot where we have this gap to be filled. That's where new markets tax credits can step in and help fill that gap. This last one is perhaps the most important and perhaps like the most unique part of the whole thing, is that you don't have to worry about applying to the Treasury Department. Frankly, you don't even have to worry about applying to us on a certain timeline. This is much more of a relationship-driven process. So before I talked about different commitments that we as a CDE have to make, we have to make commitments like we're going to put some of our funds into tribal projects in underserved states. We're going to put some of our funds into healthcare projects. We're going to put most of our funds into underserved non-metro locations for tribes. So what you're trying to do is use your relationship and build a relationship with a CDE. And again, like maybe this happens over a 4-month period or a 2-year period, but you're trying to communicate with your CDE that you have a project that is a good fit. It matches up with the commitments that they've made. You're moving the due diligence along. And that so at the appropriate point when you've kind of hit that mark, this is ideally when your CDE has new markets tax credits available. And if they don't, you've been planning accordingly. There's like a backup plan and a plan C so that not every CDE gets allocation of new markets tax credits every single year. But what you're trying to do is position yourself so when you have a project that's ready to go, you also have a CDE that can provide this injection of capital into your project. Just real quick to kind of wrap this up, what I would say here is that this is a really critically important part. And this can take anywhere from a month to 6 months to 2 years. There's no requirement, but my goal is what do we need to do to ensure that the tribe, the council, the team knows how this tool works so that you can make a decision in your best interest, whether or not this is in the tribe's interest, whether or not it's in the interest of the tribe's sovereignty to use this tool. In the process, you're raising that other capital. And when those things come together, that's when a CDE can issue a term sheet and say, we're going to formally bring this into the table. So when they do that, they're going to bring that investor partner to the table as well. So we as the CDE would say, here's an offer of new markets tax credits. Here's the investor partner that's going to pay for those credits. And then that sets in motion this period of time where, basically you're doing the due diligence like on any financial closing. So an ALTA survey, projections for the project, you're doing all the environmental work. Again, that could happen after you're already under construction, but the funds are all going to come into the project at one shot, one chunk of money that is available for the tribe to use and draw down on. So we're close to being right at the end. There's a question about what is a CDE. Again, a CDE, I'll go back here, is it's a community development entity. The gist of it is that CDEs are the entities that apply to the Treasury Department, and then they're the ones that commit to putting it into projects. So again, a CDE is a community development entity. They're ultimately who you will partner with to get and receive an allocation of new markets tax credits. Any other kind of final questions before I turn it over to Jasmine? Well, again, I want to say thank you again to the Native Learning Center, to the great work that Jasmine and her team do, making this resource available for free all the time. I know that it's available after as well. So if you have teammates that want to join, that opportunity is available. So with that, please feel free to reach out anytime. More than happy to talk about projects, short-term, longer term. But with that, I will turn it back over to Jasmine.
All right. Thank you so much, Adam Rose, for your time and effort with this wonderful presentation. I'm sure everyone certainly learned a lot. As I close out the webinar, please feel free to submit any questions or comments you may have in the chat box. All right. Let me go ahead and, all right. Please take a moment to complete our survey about today's webinar that I have just linked for you in the chat. It only takes a minute or so, and your feedback really helps us do more of what is working well and try to improve upon areas that need it. We also invite you to be as candid as you like. The survey is completely anonymous. And we hope you can join us for our next webinar. It'll be on steps to starting a nonprofit organization with Vince Franco, founder and CEO of New Venture Consulting, LLC, on March 3rd, 2026 at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, like Adam stated earlier, feel free to access this and any other recordings that we have in our CATHETA webinar archive. This will be posted to our YouTube channel as well as in the course section. So feel free to view them and share them with your colleagues and friends. Just a side note, it will take some time to render, so it might not be posted exactly today. And also, please check out our upcoming events posted on our various social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We also have an in-house podcast titled The Hope of Thing, a Native American Podcast, and we just released a new episode 175. You can find out more information on our social media platform and also by visiting the nativelearningcenter.com. So tune in for that. You can listen to us on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, as well as view the video recordings with our special guests on YouTube. Once again, I want to thank you all for participating and joining us today, and have a fantastic rest of your day. We hope to connect with you real soon. It looks like you have a few more questions, Adam.
Okay, let's see here. Yeah, so there was a question specifically about, like, is there a resource available? Like, how do you find these groups called CDEs? What I would recommend is just shoot me an email or a text. There is certainly a directory on the Treasury's page, but it's probably a lot easier. I can just send it to you directly. So what I would send is these awards were just made most recently in December of this past year. So I'll send you like a listing of all the CDEs that got allocation of credits. And then there's also a quarterly report that identifies, that Treasury puts out, that says which groups have credits available and which groups, like the typical type of market that they serve, meaning that the type of project, the locations, if applicable, it'll say national or, identified, like specified to a particular state or handful of states. So please, I'll just put my email in the chat. Please just feel free to email me, and I'm more than happy to send that to you directly if that could be helpful. Any other final questions? Well, again, Jasmine, I really appreciate your work, and thank you again for the collaboration. And if there's questions about new markets tax credits or low-income housing tax credits, just feel free to reach out, and happy to be a resource if I can.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Adam and everyone. Hope to see you back real soon. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.